All right, welcome to this episode of the Future Education Podcast. I'll introduce our esteemed guest for today. His name is Dr. Chris Harz. He is a technologist, strategist, and storyteller who has spent his career connecting entertainment, defense, education, and more. He has worked with organizations that include DARPA, the U.S. Department of Defense, NATO, the RAND Corporation, and leading aerospace firms to develop advanced simulation, training, and collaborative learning systems. A veteran of early video game industry and collaborator with Nolan Bushnell of Atari, Chris helped pioneer the use of virtual reality, serious games, and immersive storytelling for both military and civilian learning. As an advisor to University of the Universe, he contributes to reimagining education that merges human mentorship with advanced tech, training the minds that will build our future. Dr. Chris Harz, welcome to the Future Education Podcast.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you here. We've had some long and interesting conversations off record. I thought it would be wonderful to get you on the podcast and share some of your wonderful ideas, experiences, and thoughts about education with the rest of the world here. First topic I'd like to visit is to talk about your origins and where you've come from. If you could touch upon how you got into the domain of education as a profession and how soon after that, or whether it was concurrently, you started to explore these innovative and unique methods of education.
Sure. I started at UCLA, was unhappy in engineering. It was all about equations, and I tend to be more a visual learner. And managed to get a job through college at the RAND Corporation, which is the military think tank in Santa Monica. And while I was there being a programmer for them, I saw them into war gaming. They were big on doing war games to let the military know what sort of options they had. In fact, my boss said something over and over again that's ingrained on my brain. His motto was, first expand the option range. Because military was sort of going, this is the answer. He said, what are the other options? And he must have been doing good because he left RAND and became Secretary of Defense and then director of the CIA during the crisis in Cuba. He went to meet with the president, and the military had presented him with the option to invade. He said, let's expand the option range. And what else can we do? And one of those things was to surround them and choke off supplies coming in. So that worked out great without going to war. So first expand the range. And of course, with him, I was able to go to CIA and lots of organizations, then started going into DARPA. DARPA did a lot of early video game work, including a $500 million system for online video games. That was great fun to work with. And then that spread to allies at NATO and whatnot. The name of it was SimNet, Simulation Network. Up to then, simulators were like a thing, like just an airplane. But this was getting common languages, if you will. So airplane simulators could talk with tank simulators, helicopters, and so on. I got to work on that. Let me tell you a real quick story. Since you mentioned Nolan Bushnell, I was working with the tank command and the armored command of the U.S. Army. And I went to visit the commander, two-star, Bob, and he said, Chris, what's going on with my education? My training materials are all on a shelf gathering dust, while my soldiers, the tank crews, are off playing video games. And I said, let's go talk with Nolan Bushnell and ask him. We flew out to see him, and he explained all the things, the bells and whistles, them just train to a certain point, have levels of training. So there's always to look forward to, leaderboards, competition going, and so on. So we jacked together a desktop training system, several of them, that used his knowledge and delivered them to Fort Knox, the tank school. And a few weeks later, I flew out to see Bob, the commandant, and he invited me to the O Club for drinks. I asked, "How's it going?" He said, "Last night, the tank crews broke into the training room after hours,
Mm.
started competing on the training systems and betting cases of beer on the outcome." And then he clinked glasses and he said, "I've never been so proud." So that's the difference that educational technology can make, as opposed to putting a bunch of equations on a board or having somebody lecture up front.
It's incredible insights. I actually just released an episode interviewing a gentleman named Sebastian Bourget, who created a Web3 create your own adventure gaming system called Sandbox, where you can build things, own digital assets, and trade them. That led to some reflections that we're in games everywhere, whether we know it or not. When you're on Instagram or Facebook or, these other platforms, the likes are like the points, right? The number of followers are like the different levels that you can reach, right? And he who is gamifying our experience in such a way that we're enjoying it or come back for more is really teaching us whether we like it or not, right? Teaching us and training us to do what that system requires. And I think one of the goals, based on my conversations with you and others that do gaming in education, is through University of the Universe to create games with positive outcomes for the individual and the society that are just like you talked about, right? That are so fun, addictive, enriching that people can't help but be engaged in that type of learning.
Yeah, just as a quick aside, it can be more than just normal kids. I consult to a company in Santa Monica headed by David Sonnenschein that teaches autistic children, and they are impervious to normal kinds of education of somebody preaching at them. Whereas if they do a combination of music and video games, that takes a different path in the brain and they learn vocabulary drills. They start getting competitive. They come alive. It is so incredible to see that happen. It's very much like the movie The King's Speech. That actually happened, by the way, with King James VI. They tried everything conventional to train him to stop stuttering, and it didn't work. Taking music with a different pathway, he was able to quit stuttering and start talking on the radio.
Mm-hmm. And I don't have all the details on it, but since I've studied neuroscience a bit, music engages the motor system at a deeper level and the dopamine system at a deeper level and the brain system at a more fundamental level, basal ganglia, for example, where you can't help but engage and move and complete actions as opposed to stuttering through them. So it makes sense. It's counterintuitive to go back to this theme, expand the options, expand the option space. I want to talk to you about the evolution of virtual reality and augmented reality and collaborative networks as well. You've been there with a firsthand look at the evolution of all this from inception of the concept of virtual reality to, implementations today that are quite advanced and are headed in the future to God knows where. What are your thoughts about engagement of virtual reality and augmented reality and the evolution?
Sure. Virtual reality was the first to really kick off using headsets of different kinds. It creates a computer generated world. So for our tanks, we created a battleground. You thought you were in a tank and you started shooting, but nobody got killed. Actually, getting killed virtually was a great learning experience. Kind of crazy. If people made a mistake and got killed in a battle, they learned really quick. May not be recommended for children's learning, but that creates a whole different world. You're using the existing world and your headset measures the distances around with LiDAR and then puts overlays onto that real world. The Army has a really big program on that going on now, where you put on the headset and you can look out at the real world and see the enemy with augmented light or infrared and see the distances involved and what resources you have, so-called situational awareness. They're planning on spending $21 billion on that system. For AR, people who got into that early on were like BMW car companies because they train mechanics to open the hood and then to see the different parts of the engine. And the overlay would be, hey, here are the tools you need. Here is what you would disconnect, connect, or whatnot. So they got into that, and it was great for training mechanics. For medical command, I worked with a colonel in the Army Medical Command, and for the Army medics, the 64 MLS, out in the field, they were seeing different situations, and they just weren't trained in it. So they needed on-the-spot training, and they were able to do that with these headsets where an expert MD or somebody 1,000 miles away would be looking over their shoulders and going, oh, you need to clamp off this artery, you need to do this, the other thing. And they were able to do on-the-spot training from 1,000 miles away with overlays on the actual body of the patient. For XR, it's a combination of those, and Apple and others are getting into that. AI got overlaid on that early on for doing pattern recognition. Hey, this has been happening over and over again. You may want to watch out for this.
Wow. There's so many cool things going on, and things have been evolving in such interesting directions. And of course, with the resources that are developing now in AI, we can imagine they're going to expand even further. Now, when it comes to these immersive technologies, can you talk a little bit about where we're really truly improving learning outcomes and where there might be some hype or, this is the right direction to go in this space versus a different direction?
There's lots of hype. Each of these has limits. As an example, when we were making tank simulators networked together, something wasn't clicking. I was watching these guys at Fort Knox. Oh, we had good visuals, but they weren't immersed. And I went, something's missing. So I got the head sound guy from the Star Wars program, and I sat him in one and said, what's missing? And he said, your audio is crap. So they had two cheap speakers up front. And he said, people don't get immersed from stuff up front. So he got the Boston acoustic speakers and the surround sound. And in the back, he put in subliminal things, subconscious things like tiger growls that make the brain afraid, the animal brain afraid. So he put those in, and we installed those on some of the simulators. Then I watched the next run through where I watched this captain who had a tank company that's 14 tanks, 14 simulators, and they're going into battle. He's yelling, he's screaming into his audio set, and then he ran out of gasoline. I was screaming, come on, I need gas, I need gas. And in his vision ports, he saw a tanker pulling up next to him, virtually, pulling up next to him, and he screamed, hang on, I'll help you. And he dropped his mic and opened up the door and jumped out, and he stood there dazzled in this air-conditioned giant hall full of the simulator ones. He thought he was there. He was immersed. He thought he was there. And at that point, I knew we had something. And lessons learned, I can send them to you sometime. One of the lessons, 10 lessons learned from SimNet was $1 spent on audio buys you more than $10 spent on anything else.
Wow. And it's so counterintuitive. I love hearing that. Of course, I have a musical background. Everything from playing the piano to tuning the piano, right? I've learned how to do that. So course, I have fun hearing how important audio is. Yeah, it's a tenfold return on investment of something that seems relatively simple. I mean, the amazing thing about audio is it's not some piece of equipment, right? You can have digital audio that does a very good job. It's kind of like a low impact lift to insert the audio into the system.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And you need to play with it, as you already know. For instance, we got the sounds of the gun in the tank and the F-16 airplanes. We got the most expensive microphones in the world. We got that sound copied exactly. But when we put it into the simulator, the tankers, the crew said, that's not the way it sounds. To them, we had to crank up the volume because with their emotional reception, the sounds were much louder than they were in real life.
Mm.
So what we coined then was sometimes in VR, perfect is not good enough.
Fascinating domain. And it's also just fascinating to see how this all evolved, how individuals are coming upon these realizations, somewhat counterintuitively. And of course, the theme here is to expand the pool of options clearly. I love that theme myself. I think that's part of why I'm driven to put interdisciplinarity into what we're doing with University of the Universe, bringing disciplines together that you might not traditionally do. We're planning an event in March, for example, where we'll bring together quantum computing, education, entrepreneurship, give them some time to simmer with each other in their domains of interest and gives them some time together. And I'm learning here, which I've communicated with you, by putting two things that sound a little bit like odd bedfellows, quantum computing and workforce education. You find out that there is a huge need in quantum computing for not the PhD students who know the advanced math and calculus and whatnot, but someone who probably could go from being a car mechanic to being a mechanic for a quantum computer within maybe a 3-month time span. So, well, I love this theme.
Let me do one comment on that, on critical people that you need to do these things that we discovered. And DARPA has a $3+ billion a year budget for really high tech stuff. So it's a great place to work for because they're willing to take risks. One of the things that we discovered was absolutely crucial to have a go-between. So, for instance, I did a training game for the New York Fire Department. At Carnegie Mellon, we had some really good computer programmers and the gamers and whatnot, but they weren't hitting it right. They didn't understand fire departments, and the fire department didn't understand gamers. So I had to find somebody with a foot in both camps. The technical term is an interlocutor. I found such a guy. He was able to translate, hey, we need this to be gamers and then back again. And this was absolutely critical, especially for rapid prototyping. The thing you come up with isn't perfect. It doesn't hit the spot. So you need somebody who understands, oh, this is going to change and improve. Don't worry about it. Let's try it out in this early version right now. And I'll give you a quick example. Two of the things we needed for the fire department was in the New York subway, poisonous gas and whatnot released in the New York subway. And we said, gee, the turnstiles on the New York subway are really hard to model. We're talking with our interlocutor, lieutenant. He said, I don't care about the turnstiles. You can just walk through. Some people do that anyway. What I object to is how clean everything was. New York subways don't look like that. Every firefighter going through there will go, where the hell am I? You need to put some junk and dirt on the floors. So we did that, which was much easier to do. On another one, we had to show glass breaking during a fire. And that was hard to model. It would take weeks and weeks and weeks. And we happened to have our audio guy there at the meeting. And he said, why don't I just do the sound of breaking glass? Everybody knows what that is. Just go from Germany to Park with the sound of breaking glass. And we checked. They said, sure. So in 30 minutes, we were able to do what would have taken a month to do in CGI. The interlocutor has a critical role in both saving you costs and reducing development time, especially for rapid prototyping.
Thanks for sharing that. You have such wonderful stories that really share such high impact stuff. I have a lot of respect for the fact that not only have you done education, we can do education about anything, casually, and learn how to play the piano. But one thing that you're especially immersed in, to use a word that applies elsewhere in your work, is critical situations, fire departments, military uses. This is going to become more and more important as our future becomes more critical. I mean, we're reaching sort of dire circumstances in certain domains where everyday life is becoming critical, that we really learn a new way. So very much appreciate that experience.
Last comment on that. I worked with FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security. One of the real threats, of course, is hacking, cyber warfare. For instance, we did a war game down in Long Beach, Los Angeles, the Port of LA, and Long Beach, where we had the heads of the Navy and all kinds of government heads taking part in it. And the enemy was a cyber attacking storage tanks of poison gas, of chlorine gas, and opening the valves and so on. So we're looking at how to fight this. Exercising your system is a real biggie, to try it out in real life, because they found that there were back doors they hadn't realized until they applied it in real life as an exercise.
There's three topics I want to just cover briefly here. One is education today, what you're seeing is working, beautifully on the higher end of things. Could be counterintuitive stuff. It could be some advanced crazy stuff. I also want your opinion on timeless principles of education. I'm curious about what you have as opinions. Like, there's certain things that span across the centuries that work in educational systems, be it mentorship or apprenticeships or certain types of systems around how the education is delivered, Socratic method, for example. And then also future, like, what do we think is coming down the line? It's speculative. We'll have a little fun, but maybe we'll come up with something interesting. So what's working today? What do you see as timeless? Like, it's been around for centuries and probably will be for more. And what's kind of cool on the horizon for education?
Yeah. So to start with, I'll condense a briefing that I've given to the assistant head of the Department of Education, with the Assistant Secretary of Defense for training, the lack of education in video games, in VR, XR, of the teachers. So it's T3, train the trainers. And we tried, for instance, different schools to introduce video games, various colleagues at different universities, Washington, and so on, that ran tests of teaching math by a video game versus the conventional, traditional way. And they wiped them out. They were just incredibly successful in doing that, because that's how the human mind learns. It learns with visuals, it learns with stories, it learns with competition, with group learning, playing off each other. The problem is that all the efforts for that have failed, because the teachers have not been trained in how to use video games. And there was an English study in the UK where they found they're actually afraid of them, because the students will know more about video games and computers than them, and will make them look like fools. So it's a huge potential for K-12, or you name it, and especially STEM, or just about every field, using VR, XR, but it can't be implemented because no one is paying attention to the T3 component of it. The military is probably, and I found the CIA, their Science and Technology Division, is I'll probably pay more attention to it than anyone else. But K-12 and schools have no clue about using those in the classroom because the teachers aren't educated in it. So the first thing that would make a huge difference would be training the teachers and showing them using advanced training methods so that they realize it's not how much of a computer dweeb you are, it's all the underlying principles of training. And you can totally master that. Then moving on for using competition, I flew out to the university for cyber war. The DoD and DHS have published that there are 100,000 jobs for cyber war experts in every kind of field because it's such a big thing. The deputy head of the FBI told me one of the biggest growing businesses is cyber war. These guys are holding up hospitals, holding up power stations, whatnot. Hey, pay us $10, $20 million or else we'll shut you down and you won't be able to recover from that. So that's a huge thing. Problem is, the way it's taught right now is like a Maginot Line defense. This in University of Louisiana, they actually had the students in competing teams. They were learning offense and defense, but they were doing competition, which nobody else was using, and came up with brilliant solutions for that. Using those kinds of psychological things, of competition, of visuals, of leaderboards as rewards for exceeding, or that is the future. You right on.
It's almost as if you've answered all three here in the same statement here. I asked about what's working now. I asked about what's timeless, and I asked about what's coming for the future. And what I picked apart from what you said is there's things that are working now, for example, like gaming and education, but they're not widely distributed, and that's the kind of where people say the future is here, but it's just not widely distributed. That's working now, gaming and education. But what's not working about it is the expansion, the implementation, the support network around it. The reasons why it's working, I think, brought out some of the timeless principles, which were a bit askew from what I was delivering as ideas, mentorship, guild systems, almost like asking you to bring up some antiquated thing from medieval times about how education worked then and it still does now. But you really just brought up nothing historical, but just something about human nature, right? What works in education is what works in your normal social engagement in life, of interacting with other people, having some fun, getting a little bit competitive, right? These are just principles that work. They don't even have a name because they're so ingrained in just how we operate as humans. And what you've mentioned here, what's the future? I suppose the future is solving some of these problems in such a way that we can make learning important skills for the future as second nature as we operate normally in our everyday lives.
But you mentioned in the past centuries that there'd be a skilled person and then he'd have an assistant that would help him and do the mopping and sweeping up and over time learn the skill. And that's the way it was done for thousands of years. That needs to be accelerated. For instance, I was at a command and control center for water purification, and making a mistake could kill hundreds of people in that particular center. The problem was doing the knowledge elicitation. For the expert, how do you capture his or her knowledge and put it into a learning set like a game? For this, that we managed to get a system where we replicated all the controls and came up with crises and whatnot, and then watched the experts were then responding to that, which switches they flipped, what dials they responded to, watch them through the whole sequence. We also did that with the Air Force in a program called Pilots Associate, because people had been trying to, get the pilot to describe what he's doing. Pilots are not writers. They can't do it. They can only describe what they're doing with visuals and, hey, he was there behind me, or then I did this graphically with visuals. So there is a huge shortage where older guys are retiring for training for the younger guys.
Yeah.
So doing that's part of AI, the knowledge elicitation, modeling what people do graphically so that the younger generation can uh, take it up. And that would be great, whether for really young kids or guys later on doing critical stuff like war, public health, or, of course, medicine.
It is very important. And I've been engaged in a bit of that. It's very meaningful work too, because the individuals that have the knowledge would love to share it in whatever way they can. And it's very fulfilling, I've also seen, for the individuals who have just baked in knowledge. They're almost hungry to share it, and have some means that it be passed along.
In my humble opinion, it'd be great if we had easier ways of training music. I mean, I play the ukulele. You're probably aware that the expert on intelligence, Gardner at Harvard, said there are 8 different types of intelligence. One is IQ. I mean, I'm a member of Mensa. That's fun, but that's basically on verbal skills, reading and such. There is music, which is totally different from that. You can be a genius in one and double as hell in the other. There is mathematics. The two have some correlation, but math is a separate intelligence. Proprioceptive, like how good you are at basketball, is yet. So recognizing somebody's skills in one set is great, rather than thinking it's all about IQ.
You have so much to share, and you're so up to date on everything, and so much, kind of behind the scenes stuff we don't always get to hear about. I appreciate you joining us today. Before we wrap, any final thoughts, final words of wisdom, places people should go to find something out about you? I know you have some books that have been published, and you have a website. Tell the listeners what you want to tell them with your time here.
Sure. You mentioned some. There are some areas of education that people think, oh, everything's all handled already. It's so far from that. I had a meeting a couple of months ago with Peter Diamandis at an AI conference. And I said, Peter, every presentation was on the conscious mind. Make it better, make consciousness better, blah, blah, blah. Problem is, over 80%, 80 to 90% of our decisions, what we do in life, are made by the subconscious mind. And there was not a single one of those that addressed that. And he laughed and said, Chris, I agree. Here's a card for one of my assistants. If you come up with something, please get a hold of us. So I'm looking at that now, how to educate the subconscious mind for looking at the things that keep you from your goals. Okay? Whereas the mind thinking it's doing a good thing will create minefields and stop you from reaching a goal. And there's ways to detect those and get around them. So AI for the subconscious mind would be terrific. We mentioned education for incarcerated. What an ROI that had for the U.S. since it has more incarcerated by numbers and percentage than any other country on earth. And those guys have a really high rate of recidivism. Those guys are back in jail in 6 months. But if you train them in something useful to do, and this has been demonstrated over and over, it can't be normal lectures with equations on a board or somebody preaching. It needs to be like for kids. It needs to be immersive with pictures and graphics. Upskilling is a giant problem right now because everybody's scared of it, but the companies don't have any real programs to teach AI to their existing high-end staff, and the colleges don't either. They teach at college every now and then. I walked into several, and the textbooks are like 3 years out of date. You want to learn AI, you want to learn VR, uh, problem with VR, both of them is you can't just go into a computer department. You need computers, you need graphics, you need audio, you need a bunch of things to come together to really teach somebody, whether they're 5 years old or 55 years old. We all respond to the same basic things. So those are three areas. One more is veterans. Veterans right now, and there's many of them, come out of the Army, Air Force, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to translate their skills, which are desperately needed, to a recruiter. A guy goes, gee, I was head of a tank company and I managed we had great shooting scores. And the recruiter goes, let me out of here. But if he can translate that into, here's what I know about leadership, here's what I know about motivating people, if we can find a way to translate those skills into what recruiters are looking for, what's exciting about that is the Army and so on are now putting money into that. That is, a guy in the Army, before he gets out, a year before he gets out, there's money available for training so that they'll have jobs when they get out, because their unemployment when they leave the service is just off the charts. So those are a couple of examples where better educational technology could make a huge difference for people getting into them, making a fair amount of money as well, because it's needed and wanted.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your thoughts on everything today. I think we can wrap up. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks.